It is by now common knowledge in the TF2 community that the training mode intended for new players isn't up to today's industry standards. When it works, the training mode lets users test the weapons and technicalities from only 4 of the 9 classes in the game. Now, if there are any classes that should be featured here, I guess they picked the right ones. However, with this shallow and disappointing training mode, new users are forced to look elsewhere, such as YouTube tutorials or Steam guides. But what if I told you that there actually is an official guide by Valve that is better than the in-game tutorial? But here's the thing, it isn't actually in-game, it's in real life. Team Fortress 2 released in 2007 as a part of the Orange Box bundle, which included Portal, Half-Life 2, and Half-Life 2 Episode 1 and 2. Games releasing in 2007 were very different from releases today. Things were much more physical, even when buying PC games. Speaking of things being much more physical, so were the tutorials and, well, the guides. Releasing around the same time as TF2 and the Orange Box was the officially Valve-endorsed Orange Box Guide by Prima Games. This guide not only told you about the different NPCs in Half-Life, but it also told you how to play the different classes in TF2. While this is not a direct Valve product as something you would see being sold on the Valve shop, it is Valve endorsed. In the introduction of the guide, a special acknowledgement is being given to the entire TF2 team for being so great in sharing their time and knowledge. Now, when I first saw this, I was very excited, because I hadn't even heard of this before. However, one thing to keep in mind, before we take a closer look at the content, is that this was made for the 2007 release version of TF2, and a lot has happened since then. The TF2 section of the guide begins on page 271 and starts off with an explanatory section of different things in the game that are important to know, such as controls, attacking, reloading, and crits. Among these you also find some of TF2's trademarks, such as the Nemesis system and taunting, which have become staples of the game throughout the years. Interestingly, there is a large emphasis on the team aspect of the game. They even have a list of team callouts that show how to send good versus how to send bad messages to your teammates for information. And honestly, the bad example is better than most of the info I see in my Dust Bowl games 16 years later. Later on in the guide, my favorite part begins, the class guides. Beginning with the Scout, we learn that he's unsurprisingly very fast. When reading the Scout guide, I especially found the developer commentary very funny, as his intended playstyle was to rely on his mobility for dodging enemies and getting close. Which makes sense, but because of his slow rate of fire, you're encouraged to pause when you fire, then dodge, then pause, and so on. While I can see that if you stand still and plant your crosshair waiting for the enemy to walk into it, it might be easier to hit your targets. The delivery of the text seems really funny to me. I went out and tried the OG Scout aim tips straight from the developers, and well, I'll just let the clips speak for themselves. Whatever I do... Okay, thanks, Erasmus. Whatever I do, I can't... There we go, just like that. There we go. Is it that easy? Is it that easy? Yeah, so that was a true show of skill, and that wasn't lucky at all. And clearly that is the superior way to play Scout. While I wouldn't under any circumstance take Scout tips from me, because, well, I'm pretty bad, the guide shows some great tips in regards to what you should prioritize as the Scout. Medics, snipers, and demos. I mean, the demo is pretty obvious to me, as Scout is pretty much demo's direct counter, and having a couple of hours on Scout myself, the others make sense too. You want to go for the flanks and get the unsuspecting enemies, but if that doesn't work out how you intend to, there's tips for that too. I think the most important part of the Scout segment is the advantage of falling back from the front line. Not because you can replenish your health and avoid a long respawn time, because they are so aware of how annoying Scouts would be to play against, and how the Scouts could use this frustration to their advantage. By baiting kill-hungry enemies into sentry nests and other teammates, the Scouts can still help out the team a whole lot, without even having to get the kills themselves. Looking at the other Scout tips, I see some foreshadowing with the tip of being wary of sentry guns. It's a great tip and it makes sense and all, but if only they knew what would be added in the years to come. They do also mention the option of dealing with sentries at range with your pistol, which, I mean, it's viable, but I would hope that anyone else on my team, maybe someone with a big rocket launcher, could help out with that. One of the first tips that appear in the soldier guide is the upside the soldier has in terms of movement abilities. By using his rocket launcher, he can not only reach positions that no other class is able to, but also utilize the splash damage by raining down rockets onto the opponents below. I really enjoy this part of the guide, because of how far rocket jumping has progressed throughout the lifespan of the game. I remember years ago watching people like Vuincent posting jumping tutorials, and to this day we're still seeing an evolution with rocket jumping, where people are finding new and creative ways of utilizing the soldier's primaries. While I myself never reached the true skill ceiling of rocket jumping, it is without a doubt one of, if not the strongest part of the soldier's loadout, which kinda has me wondering, why isn't there more about this in the in-game tutorial? It is also mentioned in the guide to make use of your secondary when fighting up close and taking care of sentries for your team, which I think in general just do make sense if you compare it to the other classes on the team. There is an emphasis on being careful from taking damage with your own rockets, which is actually something that's in the in-game guide too, so I'm kinda happy to see that we at least have something in the in-game guide. While looking up on the stats of the rocket launcher at the time of launch, I was surprised to find out that the rocket launcher used to hold 36 rockets. Another thing that I find very interesting about this time period in TF2 is the lack of air blast, which was first introduced in the Pyro update on June 19th of 2008, 8 months after the game's release. Take it from a well-respected community member like Pyro to truly explain the frustrations of the early game soldier.
Thing that everyone in the Team Fortress 2 community needs to know. The soldier is the worst class that was ever invented. It has no downside. Give me a downside that the soldier in TF2 has. Give me any downside. He has none. Because every fucking time on the Xbox I play as Pyro, you'd have a soldier, and what do? They get their rocket launcher, they just aim down and they keep firing until like you die. That's it. No skill.
Okay, before we even get into the Pyro guide, I just want to share that I found this amazing quote from one of the original TF2 developers who stated that they added the Pyro to help out players with slow network connections. Everything just makes so much more sense now. Just like the Soldier guide, the Pyro guide lays an unsurprisingly large emphasis on the primary weapon of the Pyro. The guide talks about the Pyro being the ultimate up-close killer. One thing that I found very interesting was that they mentioned the obstruction of the enemy's vision and confusing them while they're burning. This after effect is not only painful, but also mars the victim's vision, confusing him and making it difficult to determine where the Pyro stands and which direction they should flee. While I can't say that I'm personally confused when I'm being set on fire by a Pyro, that might be because of my extensive playtime in TF2, or because players back in 2007 hadn't quite seen a visual impairing burn effect alike at the time. A part of the Pyro guide which I especially enjoy is the emphasis on surprising your enemies by waiting around corners. However, still being wary that doing this too frequently will result in enemies expecting your positioning. I can only imagine the fun of being a Pyro in the early stages of the game, where no hiding spot had been considered meta and you could truly take an enemy off guard. While I wasn't around to play TF2 back in its release, I did pick up this physical copy of the Orange Box a few years back thanks to a good friend of mine. I was granted this hat, the proof of purchase, which does feel like a true part of TF2 history. I hope you guys found this guide interesting, and I'm very curious to know what you guys thought of the intended tips for the original playstyles of the game. I am planning on making 2 more videos in this series so that I can cover all the 9 classes in the guide. I appreciate your support, and I'll see you again very soon.